Every planet covered elsewhere in this kind of retelling has its own ancient name, its own god, its own place among what the Greeks, Babylonians, and Israelites all called the wandering stars. Earth was never counted among them, not because ancient astronomers overlooked it, but because in every ancient cosmology, Earth was the fixed point everything else was measured against, not a wanderer itself. A claim spreading online says the Book of Enoch, a text genuinely excluded from the Western Bible in the 4th century and preserved for over 1,000 years by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, describes Earth differently, not as a gate, but as a fixed base every other gate was built to protect, wrapped in an uneven shield, held steady by an oversized companion, restless at its center. This video checks that claim directly against what Enoch's astronomical book actually contains, and against what geophysics has genuinely confirmed about Earth's magnetic field, its moon, and its interior. This is the last planet-focused video in this series, and it's worth explaining why Earth makes for a slightly different kind of check than the others. Every other planet covered so far involved matching a fabricated or paraphrased textual claim against space-based observations most viewers have only encountered as headlines. Earth is different. The science involved here is measured constantly by satellites in orbit and seismometers under our own feet, and much of it is directly observable in ways that don't require a spacecraft to reach another world first. That makes it, if anything, an even better test case for the same underlying question. Does checking a claim like this against the actual science support it? Or does it mostly reveal how flexible ancient religious language can be made to seem in hindsight? Before we go further, subscribe now if this kind of textual and historical exploration is what you are here for. Every week this channel examines ancient texts, scholarly debates, and the interpretive questions that mainstream discourse sometimes leaves at the edge. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. What's real about the Enoch manuscript tradition? Enoch's exclusion from the Western canon is documented history, most concretely marked at the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE, and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church really is the reason a complete text survives today, preserved continuously in Ge'ez for over 1,000 years, with only fragments of the Greek and Aramaic witnesses later recovered from Qumran after 1947. The astronomical book, chapters 72 through 82, really is considered among the oldest sections of 1st Enoch, structured around 12 gates governing the sun and moon's yearly cycle. What isn't established is a passage describing Earth as a distinct base wrapped in an uneven covering held steady by an oversized companion, restless at its center, remade once by what lived beneath it. No published critical edition of the astronomical book, Ge'ez, Aramaic or Greek, contains this material. The real chapters 72 to 82 concern the sun and moon's gates. They don't describe Earth as a separate structural component with its own shield and companion, and the text has no equivalent to a magnetic field, a planetary interior, or a moon formation event, concepts with no parallel in the cosmology of the era that produced it. A claim built on unattributed, paraphrased language, translated as directly as the Ge'ez allows, what most translators allegedly read as generic, without naming a specific verse in a real published edition, isn't something a viewer can check, which is worth treating as a real signal on its own, independent of how well the surrounding geophysics holds up. Earth's magnetic field and the South Atlantic anomaly. The geophysics underlying this claim is genuinely remarkable, and it doesn't need an ancient text to be worth taking seriously. Earth's magnetic field, generated by the churning motion of molten iron in the outer core, really does deflect the bulk of charged particles streaming from the Sun, the same basic protection Mars is believed to have lost roughly 4 billion years ago. That field isn't uniform. Satellite measurements since the 1980s, refined significantly by the European Space Agency's SWARM mission. 3 satellites launched in 2013 specifically to map Earth's field in unprecedented detail, have tracked a region over the South Atlantic and South America, the South Atlantic anomaly, where the field is measurably weaker than anywhere else on the globe, weak enough that spacecraft passing through it experience elevated radiation exposure and occasional instrument glitches, effects mission planners now routinely account for in advance. The anomaly has genuinely been growing and changing shape. Measurements show the weak patch expanding since satellite tracking began, drifting gradually westward, and in recent years a second, distinct weak zone has started forming southwest of Africa, splitting what was previously a single depression into what increasingly looks like two separate lobes. A development swarm's data has only been precise enough to confirm within roughly the last decade. Researchers generally attribute this to complex turbulent flow patterns deep in the outer core beneath that region, possibly linked to an unusual patch of dense rock at the core mantle boundary. But genuine, unresolved debate exists over what it means going forward. Some view it as a normal, recurring feature that will eventually stabilize or drift elsewhere. Others as a potential early sign of a full magnetic reversal, something Earth's geological record shows has happened repeatedly, most recently and completely around 780,000 years ago. No current model can reliably predict when or whether the next full reversal will begin, and it's worth being direct that a weakening field, even a genuine early reversal signal, isn't itself evidence of imminent danger. The geological record shows past reversals unfolding over centuries to millennia, not overnight, with Earth's surface remaining fully habitable through every prior transition on record. The Moon, real formation science and its stabilizing effect. Earth's moon really is unusually large relative to its parent planet, roughly a quarter of Earth's diameter, a far higher ratio than any other major planetary moon, aside from the debated case of Pluto and Charon. The leading formation explanation, supported by the composition of lunar rock samples returned during the Apollo missions, holds that a Mars-sized protoplanet, informally called Theia, collided with the early Earth roughly 4.5 billion years ago, with debris flung into orbit coalescing into the Moon afterward, potentially within just decades to centuries by some recent simulations, far faster than older models assumed. Exactly how that collision produced a moon with chemical composition so strikingly similar to Earth's own mantle remains an active area of refinement, with some recent models proposing the young Earth and the debris disk partially mixed and chemically re-equilibrated after the impact, rather than the Moon forming purely from Theia's own material as originally assumed. What the Moon does for Earth today is genuinely measurable. Its gravity helps stabilize Earth's axial tilt within a narrow, consistent range, rather than allowing the kind of chaotic wobble computer models suggest Mars's tilt has undergone repeatedly, lacking a comparably large moon of its own. A wildly fluctuating tilt would mean wildly fluctuating seasons and climate zones over geological timescales, potentially hostile to the long-term ecological stability complex life appears to need. Some researchers consider this one of several genuinely fortunate circumstances behind Earth's long-term habitability, though how essential a large moon actually is remains debated. Some more recent modeling suggests Earth's tilt might have stayed reasonably stable even without so large a moon, under certain assumptions about the rest of the solar system's configuration. Earth's inner core, a genuinely recent discovery. Beneath Earth's molten outer core sits a solid inner core, a ball of iron and nickel roughly the size of Pluto, discovered indirectly through seismic wave studies in the 1930s, but only recently studied in fine enough detail to track its actual motion. Because the inner core floats within the liquid outer core, rather than being rigidly attached to the rest of the planet, it can rotate at a slightly different rate than the mantle and crust above it. Studies published in 2023, using decades of seismic data from earthquakes whose waves traveled directly through the inner core, found its rotation relative to the surface appears to have slowed significantly since around 2009, with some researchers proposing it may now be drifting slightly backward relative to the mantle, after apparently spinning faster throughout the latter half of the 20th century. Other seismologists studying similar data have reached different conclusions about the timing and magnitude of the shift, with some proposing a longer, roughly 70-year oscillation rather than a permanent reversal. What drives these apparent changes, and how they relate to longer-term shifts in the length of Earth's day, itself measured varying by fractions of a second over multi-decade cycles, remains a genuinely active, only partially resolved area of geophysics. Earth's atmosphere, rewritten twice by life itself. The atmosphere the Enoch passage's covering language gets matched to has a real, dramatic history of its own. For roughly the first 2 billion years of Earth's existence, its atmosphere contained essentially no free oxygen. That changed around 2.4 billion years ago during the Great Oxidation Event, when cyanobacteria, simple photosynthetic microorganisms that had likely existed for hundreds of millions of years without dramatically altering the atmosphere, finally began producing oxygen faster than rocks, oceans, and other chemical sinks could absorb it, allowing free oxygen to accumulate for the first time. The consequence was catastrophic for the anaerobic organisms that had dominated Earth until then, for whom oxygen was directly toxic, making the event, by some estimates, one of the largest mass extinctions in the planet's history, long before anything resembling a plant or animal existed to be affected by it. Exactly why oxygen accumulation happened when it did, and in the specific stepped pattern the geological record shows rather than a smooth rise, remains genuinely debated among researchers studying early atmospheric chemistry. There's a second chapter to Earth's climate history worth including here. During the Cryogenian period, roughly 720 to 635 million years ago, glacial deposits found even near what was then the equator suggest Earth's surface came close to freezing over almost entirely, an event informally called snowball Earth. A broadly accepted escape mechanism involves ongoing volcanic activity pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere throughout the frozen period, since an ice-covered planet would have had little exposed rock or ocean to absorb it normally, eventually building enough greenhouse warming to trigger a rapid, planet-wide thaw. How close to total the freezing actually got remains genuinely debated, with some interpretations supporting a fully frozen hard snowball and others a slush ball scenario with open water persisting near the equator, a distinction that matters significantly for how complex life could have survived the episode at all. What can be independently verified? Enoch's canon exclusion, its Ethiopian preservation, and the astronomical book's status as an early section are documented history. The South Atlantic anomaly and the broader magnetic reversal debate, the Moon's Theia impact formation and its tilt-stabilizing effect, the inner core's recently measured rotation shift, the Great Oxidation Event, and the Snowball Earth episodes are all real, peer-reviewed geophysics and planetary science. What is not established, no version of the astronomical book, in any published critical edition, describes Earth as a distinct fixed base, with its own uneven shield, an oversized stabilizing companion, a restless center, or a covering remade by what lived beneath it. The real astronomical book's structure concerns the Sun and Moon's gates across a calendrical year. It has no equivalent for a magnetic dynamo, a planetary interior, or a giant impact moon formation, concepts requiring physics that didn't exist, even as ideas, until many centuries after the text was composed. None of this makes Earth less extraordinary. A planet carrying a magnetic shield with a growing, splitting weak patch nobody can yet explain with certainty, stabilized by a moon that shouldn't, by the ordinary odds of planet formation, have turned out this large, with an inner core quietly shifting its rotation on a cycle scientists have only recently learned to measure, and an atmosphere that's been catastrophically rewritten at least twice in its history, is already one of the most remarkable objects in the solar system without an ancient text layered on top of it. And it doesn't make the astronomical book less worth studying either. A genuinely old, genuinely unusual text that tells us something real about how an ancient community understood order and the heavens on its own historical terms. The honest version of this story is two real, separately remarkable subjects: a preserved ancient manuscript and a planet whose magnetic field, moon, interior, and atmosphere are all still active subjects of real scientific research, that this particular retelling connected with a passage that isn't actually there. The primary sources for both halves of this story remain fully open. Isaac's, Nibbs, and Nickelsburg's editions of Enoch are published and available through any research library. ESA's swarm mission data, the Apollo lunar sample analyses, the 2023 inner core rotation studies, and the geological record behind the Great Oxidation Event and Snowball Earth are all public record, published in peer-reviewed journals anyone can consult directly. Neither subject needs the other's help to be worth serious attention. It's worth closing on the same general pattern this series has returned to repeatedly, because by now it should be recognizable rather than surprising. A real, genuinely underread ancient text gets paired with a real, dense cluster of legitimate modern scientific findings that, on their own, are already remarkable enough to hold a viewer's attention without embellishment. What connects the two, every time this pattern shows up, turns out to be paraphrased, unattributed language that sounds like it's quoting something specific while never pointing to a verse a viewer could actually check. The science survives that check completely intact. The textual bridge doesn't. That distinction between what holds up under scrutiny and what was only ever designed to sound like it would is the one worth carrying forward past this video and applying to the next claim like it that shows up in a recommended feed. This documentary examines historical, textual, and scientific topics for educational purposes only. Enoch's manuscript history and the geophysics discussed here, the South Atlantic anomaly, the Moon's formation, the inner core's rotation, the Great Oxidation Event, and the Snowball Earth episodes, are documented in peer-reviewed scholarship and satellite and seismic research. The fixed base passage discussed in some popular retellings could not be located in any published critical edition of the astronomical book. A weakening magnetic field is not evidence of imminent danger. Past reversals have unfolded gradually, and Earth has remained habitable throughout. Viewers are encouraged to consult primary manuscript editions and peer-reviewed geophysics before drawing conclusions.